workshop for today, Wednesday, July 10th, to order. It's good to see everybody. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We do have 2 items on our regularly scheduled workshop. Let me start off by saying, as always, we appreciate everybody for coming out. We're going to have plenty of opportunity for public participation. I ask you to please keep all comments in as a positive and civil manner. We like to conduct ourselves in a way that we can set a model for everyone across the state and across the nation. With that, Mr. City Manager, do we have any agenda modifications?
No, sir, no modifications, but we do recommend that we take out of order the agenda items and take item 3.02 first.
All right. I'm looking at my colleagues. Anybody have a problem if we flip-flop the agenda items and take 3.02 first and then 3.01?
Not at all.
All right. Everybody that's here from the public, we are going to flip the order of the agenda items and take 3.02 first and then 3.01. But we are at that time in the meeting where we will ask for citizen input. Mr. Clerk, do we have any public speakers?
We do, Mayor. We have about 4 speakers who've filled out a card. I'll call each of them. I'm not sure in every case whether they're on 302 or 301 that they wish to speak, but they'll have the chance here, and then we'll go with the next item if that's the one they want to speak on.
Wonderful.
So our first speaker is Stanley Sims, and our second speaker will be Renee Matthews Jackson.
Great.
Speakers will come to the microphone here in the middle of the room and have 3 minutes for remarks. I'll give you a heads up when you're at about 2.5.
We on 302 or 301?
302.
302. Good evening, Mayor, Commission. I'm here. I did something that Commissioner Cox told me to do, or told everyone to do, way back at Bethel. I joined the preservation crew. Where's Miss Boone? Maybe there she is. And I had the opportunity, Commissioner, to watch how these individuals organized and prepared for a presentation to come before the claim. And I was just really impressed because I always ask myself, I had the opportunity to move over to off Buckley, and I don't know if you remember when they gutted all of those trees that was there in the Walmart and the Costco area, and I saw, and y'all don't take this the wrong way, but I just know how to talk plain. I saw all of those white people standing on the sidewalk protesting about trees. And so I got to be honest with myself. And I said, now I wonder, would they be doing that if it was black folks? Well, today, I got an answer. They are trying to prevent a community from being demolished that's in the black community. And I tell you, I'm in their little group, and they're up, Mayor, 2 and 3 in the morning. That ain't my phone, that's Cynthia's phone.
It is.
They're up 2 and 3 in the morning strategizing about this community that they don't live in, but they care about. And so to me, it waters down the fact that we are, or not water down the fact, but it strengthens the fact that Tallahassee is a holistic community, that when one hurt, we all hurt. And I was just so privileged to sit back and to read and to be a witness of how they advocate for their community, because even you have admonished me about some of the ways that I advocate, so I'm learning from them. And so I just wanted to make that be known, that the individuals in our community, we really care about our neighbors. If that neighbor is in the south side or whether that neighbor is on the north side. And I just want to thank Ms. Boone and all of her people that have brought me in and really showing me a more effective strategies to advocate for our cause. And Mr. Clerk, you can take me off for the 301. I've already have spoken with the city manager and Mr. Robert and got an answer on that. Thank you so much, Mayor. See, I did that
Thank
real
you.
well. Because my friend's here today.
All right.
Our next speaker?
Next speaker is Renee Matthews Jackson, and I will let speakers know that if you're speaking on either of the agenda items, you may certainly speak now, but if you wanted to speak on the budget and would rather wait till that item comes before us, just let me know and we'll call you again at that time.
Wonderful. Good morning. Afternoon.
Good
Excuse me.
afternoon. I am Renee Matthews Jackson. I am the CEO of Frenchtown Coalition for the Arts. And I thank you for allowing me to speak today, especially Mr. Matt Lowe, who I spoke with personally about 2 hours ago, and he invited me to come. We're representing the Frenchtown community, but actually we're representing the African-American community. And what we're seeing and what we're witnessing is a gentrification that keeps pressing against that black community while they're building 355-unit buildings. And they call it affordable housing when it's $100 a day if you're late paying your rent, and that's not affordable even for wealthy people. And what we want to do with the Frenchtown Coalition for the Arts, our motto is Frenchtown Coalition of the Arts, where the community and the arts unleash the impossible. What we want to do is the impossible. We want to keep and preserve the black culture, the African-American history. I had the occasion of being with the mayor at Big Bend Poets, and I made the mistake of saying that Frenchtown was the first African-American community in Tallahassee, and he politely corrected me and told me it was the first African-American community in the state of Florida.
That's right.
So in that, I believe that there is developmental funds available in Frenchtown, and I believe that organizations like Frenchtown Coalition of the Arts should be able to tap into those funds somehow and rebuild like Ashmore's. We already acquired B Sharp's. Then you were very proud of that. We still will be hosting music, jazz, rock and roll, blues, and we also will enlist the other 7 disciplines of theater within that building. And we want the community to come and flood that building like they did in the past, but right now the community is kind of depressed, and they feel a bit downtrodden because these big developments are happening, and their little auto shop is out of the picture. And we just want the commission to consider somehow pledging monies or funding to these smaller entities, and not, because what we're seeing is the bigger entities are getting all of the funds. And the smaller entities are struggling and raising funds on Facebook like we're doing. By the way, we're doing a very good job, and we thank everybody who has contributed to our Facebook fund. But we also would like to apply and be considered for monies to beautify our area again.
You're
B
at about
Sharp's,
2.5 minutes.
thank you. B Sharp's is a very important entity. Ashmore's is an entity. Adam is interested in us getting the brick building that's attached to Ashmore's, and we've been working with him. And so our plea is just to consider the fact that don't allow the little people in the community to be ignored. Don't allow the community who created the community to be ignored. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Tiffany Hill, followed by Leanne Boone.
Good
Hey,
morning.
Ms. Hill. Good morning.
I'm Tiffany Hill. I reside on Putnam Drive. And I saw the list for sidewalks to be placed around Tallahassee, and I did not see Putnam. And I know back in 2017, somewhere around there, I received a letter that said that there was going to be sidewalks put there. It is greatly needed in that area. There is a ditch. We had a couple of people have backed into those ditches. Actually, they used my driveway to back out and to go into the ditch. So I saw that there was sidewalks put on the opposite side of Meridian, but not on Putnam Drive side that leads up to Country Club Drive. So that would be well appreciated. Also, with the community integration and planning, I would like for everyone to take into consideration that a lot of African-American people in Tallahassee was given land years ago. And so doing a lot of the domain, eminent domain and things like that, and people being bought out of their homes, I think that we need to research the history of the home that is there and the land. Because no amount of money can replace generational gifts that were passed down. So before you do eminent domain on property, I think that we need to research the history of that land. And I kind of speak from personal experience that my family is looking into, because we believe that Monday Road was built over part of our family's grave. So I don't want that to happen to anybody else while we are doing, community resilience. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Great.
Ms. Hill, you were right. In 2017, the city did budget for sidewalks on Putnam and Polk. I talked with the city manager just this morning about that because I saw the same thing. And we've also included Texas that will be in the upcoming budget, Texas Street, to connect Putnam and Polk. So it is in the process. What I did find is the reason that it took so long to get that is the residents did not want to give up the right-of-way for the sidewalk.
I see.
And so we've been able to work through that. And so you should see dirt being turned pretty soon for sidewalks on Putnam and Polk, and hopefully soon on Texas to connect the two. And I'm sure you noticed the park that we're doing at Meridian, and
Yes,
help
thank
us
you so much.
help us work with us.
Yes,
and
I
work
am.
with the folk that are there to
Yes,
make it
yes.
something we can all be proud of.
Yes, thank you so much
Are
for
you
that.
Oliver's?
Oliver Hill
That's
is
what I
my
thought.
father.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, please tell him I said hello. That's what I
Yes,
thought.
I know, yeah. So thank you very much
so
for your
much.
time. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Leanne Boone, and then Dot Inman Johnson. And Ms. Inman Johnson is the last speaker I have. If anybody else wishes to speak, they can just fill out a form and bring it to me.
Ms. Boone, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Excellent. Okay, so I'm here today to talk about the Boynton Still project and to ask that for you to pause the project until we can get those reports back that Commissioner Bryant and Commissioner Proctor asked for, both on the compensation of the residents and the community input that was given, or at least until we can get all the proper information about the project and the land that's actually involved. So here we have Mr. Benton's oak. He lived on the property for 50 years and took care of this tree before he passed in February. It is about 77 inches in diameter at breast height, which means that it shaded the area for 400 years before Mr. Benton came along. Today, it is slated for removal by a rectangular, run-of-the-mill retention pond. Slide, please. You can see it there, marked in green. As you can see, the item that planners thought was worthy of altering the shape of the pond was a cell phone tower. You can see a little box over there. I don't have a mouse on the northeast side, and not any of the trees. However, how can you plan around something you didn't even know was there? Slide, please. We have found out that Mr. Benton's oak, the biggest tree, has always been missing on the tree survey. I have marked in red where it should have been notated. How could there have been adequate public input and planning if the information we were all relying on was incorrect? Next slide, please. For comparison, the Lynchgate oak is 82 inches in diameter at breast height. That is only 5 inches more bigger than Benton's oak. Oaks of similar size have been found to be over 500 years old, older than the country itself. Next slide, please. This is truly an exceptional species under the city's code and warrants special consideration as a biological and social resource to be preserved for the general public. This tree is on public property. It is supposed to be for a park. To be clear, we can have parks, trees, roadways, and water storage. In fact, trees are great at storing water. Next slide, please. We could easily preserve Mr. Benton's oak by doing a bump out like we did for the Twin Oaks in Smoky Hollow. You can see them in the center of the picture there. The former Smoky Hollow, that is. Next slide. Now we have found that there is this ancient oak. I am asking this commission to make a motion to request that Blueprint staff redesign the retention pond to preserve Mr. Benton's 500-year-old oak so that we can make it a centerpiece of the community rather than erasing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boone. Mr. Clerk?
Dot Inman Johnson.
Former Mayor, good to see you.
Good to see each of you. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and commissioners and staff. I'm here to speak on behalf of the outside agency grant that was submitted by Love by Jesus Family Church. It is a very small organization with a 501c3 and all of the documentation provided to the city showing that it is doing great work in this community. However, all of that work is falling on the backs of Reverend Johnson, my husband, and me. We take no money for the work we do. We do it as volunteers, and we have been carrying the Orange Avenue apartments, the youth programs there, for a year or more now. And it is draining our personal finances. And when we learned of the outside agency grants, we submitted timely, so the city received our application, and the difference between what happens if it's funded and if it's not funded is that those services would have to be discontinued for those young at-risk kids in the Orange Avenue apartments. We have no money to do the after-school programming that we are asking the city to support. We have no money to do the summer camp that we are in the midst of providing now, just with the help of the Lord. And so next year, starting in October, we will not be able to continue to provide those services. And I just want to close by saying, all research indicates that if you're wanting to make an impact on people and young people living in poverty and crime, you catch them early enough to divert them from those situations. We are targeting children from 4 or 5 years old up to 15. We are working diligently with them, and these are good kids, and we can see a difference already. We are providing things for them that they otherwise would not have, and also to their families. I ask you to give fair consideration to our application. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dot.
Mr. Clerk, any more speakers?
I have no further speakers.
We are now on 3.02. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. You directed us, the commission directed staff a couple of years ago to develop a community resilience plan that addresses a broad range of threats and vulnerabilities. And normally we think of storms as our greatest threat, but we know that's not our only threat. And so we endeavored in a comprehensive development of a plan to make sure our community is as resilient to all kinds of shocks and threats possible. In April, we presented an update of where we were, and you asked for a deeper dive into this matter. So we're back in front of you this afternoon to provide you where we are, to ask you to adopt the plan and authorize us to adopt the strategies described in the plan. Bena Ojatayo, our Director of Sustainability and Community Preservation, has been leading the charge. She's done an excellent job with this, and I'd like her to walk us through the presentation, please.
All right. Ooh, we get to the beginning. All right, you cheated a bit. I hope nobody remembers what they just saw. I started halfway. Thank you, commissioners, and thank you, city manager. It is a pleasure to come before you again. It's been about a year and a half of effort with various stakeholders, and what you have before you, and probably the thickest packet, is a lot of really good ideas, a lot of heartfelt thoughts, but also a lot of intentionality behind how we build resilience in our community. So thank you for the opportunity to dive a little bit deeper. I want to recognize those that have been part of this process. It has not just been me. I've had the privilege of shepherding it, but there really has been a lot of folks, including our consultants. That was one of the decisions, even actually before I joined the city. Kimberly Horn has been part of that, and we have some of their team members here as well. If there's some really difficult questions, I'll probably kick it off over to them. But we've also had a working group of staff members, representatives from almost every department in the city. Some are here and some are probably listening in, so I want to appreciate and recognize them, as well as multiple community stakeholders, some in here as well, and maybe others watching along. They have been critical in helping us really take a comprehensive look at what we mean by resilience. So as the city manager has mentioned, it started off thinking about resilience after the Hurricane Hermine, but it quickly became clear that this is a broad issue that we want to look at. And so the Community Resilience Plan is comprehensive. It focuses on major threats, so it won't touch on every single thing that could come our way, but it does highlight some that have bubbled up. It is long range, and it is strategic in nature. And so we have been very intentional about balancing both a bold and innovative plan with pragmatic and actionable strategies. What can we actually do in the immediate future to make progress? You will also see, both in your packet and as we talk through some of the strategies, that we have been very intentional about aligning every strategy with your priorities. And so what you're going to see is a set of actionable opportunities that align with what you've already been talking about and what the community thinks is valuable as well. Ultimately, our focus is how do we keep people safe? That is always number one. But we also focus on how we build self-sufficiency, and we build up the capacity to respond when there is a crisis. But also we want to adapt to change, because that's inevitable for every city and every community and every household. And then lastly, we want to leverage whatever our existing resources are so we can be effective with what we have, starting there first, and of course, looking for more resources as we have available. I don't think you need to be convinced of why this matters, but our region is significant, but our city specifically is significant for our region. We are strategically located. We serve a very large population compared to any other city or town nearby. And we have other communities that rely on our services. And so what happens in Tallahassee doesn't just affect us, it affects our region. And we're mindful of that. We also have a beautiful natural environment. And all of us, I think, is every year, every time you ask our community, that always rises to the top. We want to protect our environment. We value it for all the benefits, and of course, that also positions us in challenging ways when we face down climate threats. We have one of the largest public infrastructure networks, certainly in the state, fourth largest. And so our assets are critical to protect and continue to invest in. And lastly, our population continues to change. We're diverse. We have a seasonal population that changes depending on legislation or schools, but we also have an increasing elderly population that is particularly vulnerable when we do experience shocks. So we're thinking about all these as part of how we understand our region. and then we launched right into the work. So as the city manager mentioned, we started after Hurricane Hermine through community input, and with that commission recognizing that this was a need to do a comprehensive study, we started. A lot has happened since then. It's only been a year and a half, but it feels like much longer. And as we initiated this plan, it was clear from the onset that it needed to be comprehensive, but this timeline just highlights that we've experienced quite a few shocks in just a year and a half. Beyond hurricanes, and they've gotten stronger and stronger, with the most recent one being Hurricane Michael. But also we've had active shooters. And I always want to shout out our snow day, because it was legitimate. If anybody wants to talk about it, that was a real snow day for us, and the most significant in about 30 years. So more and more things are happening. We have security concerns, but nothing unusual from what other cities are experiencing. So I do want to contextualize that. A lot of cities are experiencing these changes. And what Tallahassee is trying to do is be forward-thinking, forward-looking, to get ahead of all of these issues, to have the capacity to respond and minimize disruption, but it cannot always be reactive. We do have to be strategic and long-term. And so that's how we started. And we began by understanding that for us, resilience is not just our ability to respond in the event of a crisis, but to build up our capacity for the long term. This slide shows just our planning process, and you've seen this in other contexts as well. What we want to highlight is that this process has taken a parallel approach where we engage directly with our stakeholders, we understand what our community needs are, and we quantify and qualify what our risks are. But we also back that up with a lot of data assessment, looking at all the data that we have available to us in our community, and I know there'll be more coming in the future. And we match the art and the science of planning for resilience, right? There is the lived experience in our community, but then there's also what we can learn from spatial analysis, looking at maps, looking at where people are impacted, where these threats might be more visible. So that's the path we took. Stakeholder engagement was absolutely critical. We have engaged a very broad group of individuals, representatives from nonprofit organizations to private sector. We've even had some good engagement with the state level folks that are looking at planning resilience at a state level and not really having examples like Tallahassee, and they're looking to what we're doing here to learn best practices as well. We've done traditional ones, surveys and workshops. We've also done fun things like activities with youth at camps. We've done tabletop exercises, all to gather really valuable input about how we do this moving forward, because what is clear is that Tallahassee as a city government cannot do it by themselves. This is a whole community effort. We culminated the stakeholder engagement with the Resilience Summit. This was in November, and a couple of you were able to attend, so thank you for that participation. That was an opportunity to focus in on agencies that had roles in responding during emergencies, but also support some of the critical services on a day-to-day. So in addition to our directors and our staff, we had representation from multiple agencies that took a deep dive with us, looked at the data, and strategized to get us to where we are right now. So our process took this approach. We began by asking, what are our shocks and our stressors? And the only thing that's not on there is zombies, but we have many things to be afraid of. What you see is a mix of climate-related or weather-related events, but you also see what we call stressors. These are ongoing day-to-day issues that could bubble up to major issues. However, they make it difficult to address a shock. So when there is a hurricane event, if you add a layer of vulnerability at the household level, that makes it harder to recover. When you have aging infrastructure and you have a hurricane, you have more risk of failure of your system. And so we try to understand the shocks, the discrete events, with the stressors as well, those things that are constantly at play in our community. And we also then identify what are our assets. And these assets aren't just buildings because we know the value is not in the building itself. It's what we do in these buildings. And so when we say we value a building like City Hall, what we're saying is we value governance. We value creating a place in our community where people gather and share in how we create our community. When we say we value a school system, it's not just that it provides shelter during emergencies, but it also is providing education and building up our human capital. So we matched up our assets and we compared it with our threats. And what we have, and some of these maps are shown outside of the chambers, and I invite anybody to look more at that. We have dozens and dozens of those, and some of them are also in your appendix in the packet. What we did is try to match every kind of asset that we landed on with a particular threat. So we have residential properties, we match that up with a threat like flooding, and we look at how many parcels are exposed to that, to what extent, and what is their ability to adapt in case flooding happens. So there is a difference between exposed to a threat and your ability to adapt to it. And that might be a difference with how a building is constructed to where exactly on the parcel it's located or who lives in the building. That all impacts the vulnerability. So we try to take a very detailed look. What we have because of that process, which is unlike what most communities do with resilience planning, is we have detailed parcel level data for every piece of property within our urban service area. And it is dynamic. It's designed to integrate as we get new data. And so we can really track our progress and see if we're making a difference with the various actions that we take. So the things that bubbled up in our assessment and through our stakeholder engagement are these three climate-related threats. Hurricanes, surprise, and severe storm grouped together. Flooding, and that's not just flooding from hurricane events, but extreme rain events like we may or may not, hopefully not experience this week. But wildfire also rose to the top as a threat because of our proximity to a lot of wildlands, and that interface makes us vulnerable, as well as all the damage from recent hurricanes that are sort of a good matching stick, if you would. So those are the climate threats, but we also looked at technology and infrastructure-related vulnerabilities as well. And that could be our communication networks, our road networks, cybersecurity. We looked at that, and that is a vulnerability that multiple cities are very much concerned about. And lastly, we looked at socioeconomic issues that also affect our vulnerability to any number of these risks. We had a lot of extensive input around poverty and affordability because we know that they're fundamental or foundational levels of vulnerability that heightens a household or an individual's experience to any one of those threats. And so you'll see that woven through your plan in the detailed packet. After that exercise, what we ended up with are 4 broad goals that you have before you. These are goals that summarize and capture, I think, what our ambitions are for a more resilient community. What we mean is that when we make progress and as we do a check on ourselves, we'll ask these questions. Have we empowered household to be safe, to be secure, and to be self-sufficient? When we talk about goal 2, hazard mitigation and climate adaptation, how do we protect people and our environment while we also look to the future and adapt to changes that are coming? In goal 3, we talk about planning and integration. That is, how do we get out of our silos? How do we leverage existing plans? How do we make sure they're cohesive? And we make it part of our business as usual. That, I think, will be a big marker of success. And with equity and social cohesion, we're asking and looking for opportunities to connect people with each other and with resources to thrive, because if they can thrive, they're much less vulnerable to any change or shock that they might experience. The rest of your packet explains some of these strategies that have been outlined. So under each of those 4 goals, there are 6 strategies that have been recommended. Each of those strategies include some initial actions. The way it's organized, we describe what that strategy looks like. We connect it with the shocks and stressors that are related to that. And there are, as I mentioned, about 50 or so maps in your appendix where you can reference if you wanted some additional details about how this actually maps out in our community. Those initial actions are listed, which of course could be refined and added on. And then we identify some initial community partners, again, back to the idea that it takes all of us, that this will not be something that the city itself can shoulder on its own. So diving a little deeper and quickly through all these goals, the first one is public safety and preparedness. You'll see in the list of initiatives that are suggested under there, they talk around emergency preparedness, how do we coordinate with other agencies, and building capacity for nonprofits and business organizations. We address issues like cybersecurity, vacant lots, a really broad definition of safety, again, not just focused on storm response, but how do we make sure people are safe. We identify in the plan a couple opportunities to take action immediately. Oh, nobody was going to warn me about that? We identify with all of the strategies under each goal what we are calling a game changer opportunity. And what that simply means is that we have resources and alignments within our existing organization and really within our organization to take action on a couple of these immediately. And if we do, we are able to make significant impact. So one of the first game changers that we identify under the first goal is to create places and spaces that foster community safety. And what we mean by that is that we can leverage our existing facilities and our resources to build up capacity for others. And we've started to do a little bit of that already, and so this allows us to be very intentional about integrating resilience in the way we design our spaces and how we build new facilities. We can call them things like resilience hubs, even though it could be a new facility or it could be an existing facility that's augmented. We talk about addressing vacant lots that might invite criminal activity, again, broadening the definition and description about public safety to more than just disaster preparedness. Then we go on to goal 2. Goal 2 is hazard mitigation and climate adaptation. And what we mean here is how do we protect the natural assets that we have, because the environment is protective for us. Trees, for example, provide shade, but they're also vulnerable during storms. So how do we balance that? And you've taken an important step with our urban forest master plan for us to be intentional about how we improve the quality and of our canopy. We, by all means, have to harden our infrastructure, and so we have to make those kinds of investment looking forward. But also, we need to preserve the buildings that we do have, and we have some tools in place that will allow us to do that. Resources to help residents to address hazards on their households, to mitigate that before they're exposed to any other additional threats. And then we also have to look even further ahead and think about how we play a role in reducing our carbon footprint so that we can lessen the impact of some of these climate effects, because the science is clear on that. And you've taken a bold step on that already with your clean energy resolution to send us in that right direction. What we want to highlight as a game changer opportunity is strategy 2.5, which focuses on future-proofing our built environment. And so what that means is we want to be intentional about using the information we have about risk and letting that inform how we design, how we build, and how we create standards for our built environment. The next goal 3 is planning and integration. And again, this is to make sure that all this effort is not wasted, that we apply it, that we make sure it's cohesive with things that we're already doing and well aligned. It focuses on taking all the data and making it shareable and provide it in a way that helps people to make good decisions, whether that's within city government or within our community partners as well. But we also focus on how we can partner, whether it's on research, partnerships, or innovation, to really extend this work beyond our boundaries. One of the best opportunities we have in this category is to continue the work that we've done with this data tracking and to package it in a way that makes sense for more people in our community. So we can use that to make decisions, and we can track our progress and really make sure you're getting the right kind of return on your investment. Finally, in goal 4, we talk about equity and social cohesion. You'll see here strategies that address safe housing. We talk about financial security and building up our neighborhood's capacity to be self-sufficient. We talk about healthy food systems, because in any crisis, the first question people are asking, as long as they're safe, is where are we going to eat? what are we going to eat? And how do we build that infrastructure in place now so that neighborhoods and all parts of our community can be secure in that way? We also link it with our efforts around transportation options and accessibility and the digital divide, where we can make sure everybody get access to critical information on time and in a way that's meaningful for them to make good decisions for their safety. We've learned, and this goal is important, because when people feel secured themselves, they can help themselves, but they can also help their neighbors. And so that social cohesion piece really came out loudly with our stakeholders to say, we want to know how we can help ourselves, and we want to know how we can also help others. And I think that's a good sign for our community and a great way to continue to invest. The game changer that we identify in this category is if we can get everybody sheltered. If you are safely sheltered, you are less vulnerable to multiple threats and vulnerabilities. It does not an absolute guarantee, so don't put me on a record for saying that. But we know that safe shelter is a basic necessity. People that are sheltered, that feel secure in their shelter, are better protected from climate hazards for sure, but they're also less likely to enter into other circumstances that spiral out of control, like poverty, financial insecurity, that makes it difficult for them to deal with crisis in other ways. And we have some tools in that area to address this. It's a game changer because we have opportunities, we have resources to leverage to really make some progress. And that would summarize the list of strategies that are before you. Again, there's much more detail in there. What we have before you today is to adopt these strategies and authorize the city manager to do all the work required to implement. Thank you very much.
Abena, you did a fantastic job. Thank you very much. And I know you've been working really hard on this, you and your team. And wonderful presentation, too. Mr. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not have any speakers.
Okay, let's open it up for discussion. Commissioner Williams-Cox.
I also want to pile on and say thank you and your team. This is outstanding. I've had an opportunity to go through it and read it in my study time, and I appreciate the fact that we have not ignored or avoided the use of the word poverty, because that is very important, because as we know, when the levees broke in New Orleans all those years ago, those who could get out, got out. Those who couldn't suffered. And we want to make sure that we do not create a situation in our city where that occurs. So can you maybe speak a little bit more to the piece on poverty? I see the strategies, but can we dig a little deeper about some of the things that you learned in the citizens' engagement that were important to our folks in this regard?
Certainly. So I think what you'll see in the packet, even on the maps, is that socioeconomic issues were sort of a big interest area, but it's also a big reality. For the very reasons you stated, is at a very fundamental level. If people are not financially or socially or even mentally secured, they are more vulnerable. And so that came up in several of the issues, and you'll see that with the strategies, the resilience plan takes a vulnerability lens. And what that means is it asks the question about how are we vulnerable and who is vulnerable. And we start there. We were also very intentional about integrating community data that already exists so that we are not reinventing the wheel. So we partnered with folks like at the United Way that had data about our Alice population. We integrate that in the maps. And so when we're looking at residential properties that are exposed to wildfire, integrated in that vulnerability is who lives there, what's the socioeconomic markers, the data that you might see with the census data, so even educational attainment, who depends on public transportation, what's the income level, all of that is layered in there to paint the picture accurately. And that allows us, when we plug in with existing community data, it allows us to also update it as that data changes. So as we improve and as we make real progress on addressing poverty, you'll see that that would also be reflected in the data moving forward. But I think that consensus was there in the community. We know that. We don't want to shy away from it. And we want to be intentional about leveraging whatever resources we have to minimize that level of vulnerability.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Bryant.
Yes, let me pile on, as Commissioner Williams-Cox said, to the commendations for an outstanding work product. As a strategic planner myself, I want you to know that this product is exemplary.
Thank you.
Not only did it start with what is it we're trying to accomplish, you actually got input from across the spectrum, then you developed some objectives and targets, and then you came up with some recommendations for what to do. So let me just start by saying you are to be commended and your staff for doing an excellent job. And it's a roadmap that we can keep up with as commissioners to determine where we are and how well we're doing. So commendations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Abina, I certainly want to commend you on this report. I remember when you first came on board, we were just coming out of Hurricane Michael. And of course, the emphasis then was how do we restore our community after Michael and after the storm that we had that hit northeast Tallahassee and the Baum Road area. But you've taken it far beyond that. Again, as Commissioner Bryant said, I mean, this is one of the most comprehensive reports I've seen come before this commission since I've been here, which is a relatively short period of time, but still, it's very comprehensive. The kind of community input that you've gotten on this, working with our partners to build this resiliency plan. I think our community could be very comfortable that whatever we would confront, we've got a plan and a roadmap to help us to get beyond that, if you will. And so thank you for all the work that you've put into this, your staff and the partners, because I'm sure you couldn't have done it without their assistance as well.
Absolutely.
And also, I just wanted to bring to the commission's attention, I did get an email, and I don't know why they sent it just to me, but it's from a Vi Miller. And Vi is with Citizens Against Fracking, I think, but is also a member of Rethink Energy, which is, Rethink Energy is one of our big partners in this as well. And there were a couple of asks, and I forwarded that email, Mr. City Manager, I copied you on it, and I forwarded it to Abina. So if you all would take a look at that and the ask that they have in that, and maybe follow up with them and see if that's something that we can accommodate them on.
Absolutely.
But again, thank you so much for the work that you've done. It's, again, like Commissioner Bryant said, an exemplary report.
Commissioner Matlow.
Thank you. First off, I think this is the cutting edge, what we're working on right here from where we were just a few years ago when we first got hit by a hurricane, and everyone's like, oh, we can get hit by those here? and to where we are, what we've experienced the last few years. So thank you for all your hard work. I actually received the same email.
Oh, did you? Okay. Okay.
They were just looking for consistency in language, which I think we're already there. By 2050 versus no later than 2050, just to show that we're trying to get there as quick as possible. But that's our hard deadline, and also to be just kind of a coordination between them and the environmental community. One thing I did want to bring everybody's attention to on goal 4.6, when we talk about the digital divide. I like resiliency because it's really forward-thinking and where we're trying to go and where we're trying to get. And I just want to make sure when we talk about the digital divide, we talk about public Wi-Fi specifically here, but really connection speeds and where we're going. When we have new neighborhoods that are coming online like Canopy that are getting fiber connections directly to the home, I want to make sure, as everybody else is getting a screwdriver, if other people are getting a power drill, we haven't really bridged the divide. We just kind of move. So when we're my only recommendation there would be to add equal before access, so equal access to critical information. So as speeds grow, we're trying to provide the same level of service to everyone.
Good point.
I would move we adopt the report, Mr. City Manager, and direct Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, and direct the city manager to implement the strategies.
Second.
The staff recommendation has been properly moved by the Mayor Pro Tem and seconded by, the rest of the
All of us.
commission. Absolutely. Any further comments? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, and it passes unanimously. We are now on 3.01, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Abana.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Ben.
absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners.
Let it be noted in the record that we did recognize the one snow day that we had.
Did we put that down in history? What was that actual
That's
day?
right.
So we can celebrate it annually?
I think we may like to have that today, actually, if we can have that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our Director of Resource Management has joined us. He'll lead the presentation. Let me frame the conversation. This is the sixth time that you will discuss the budget so far this year. We've committed to providing frequent updates, so we've got a good handle on how we're proceeding with the current budget and to make sure you're well informed and give us good guidance on budget development for next year, which would be fiscal year 20. Today's update involves a third quarter update, where we are so far for the first 9 months of our year, our fiscal year, as well as an update on our capital improvement plan for fiscal year 20 and the overall 5-year upcoming plan. We're also asking, and to put this on your radar as you conclude the discussion, for you to authorize and appropriate the Tallahassee Future Leaders Academy, TFLA, grant that we've received from Prime Meridian Bank for FY19. We need to take action to do that. Also in here, we will draw out a discussion. You heard a little bit about it earlier. It's something that you have emphasized and directed us to do, is to increase the construction of new sidewalks in our community. We want to share with you those sidewalk segments that we believe we can make a lot of progress on next year, for you to weigh in and give us direction on as well. So those are the things we intend to talk about. With that, I'll ask Robert Wiggin to lead us through the presentation.
Robert, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, City Manager, appointed officials, commissioners. As Reese mentioned, our sixth meeting on the budget, we met in May to talk about the second quarter update, met in June and talked about the proposed operating budget, and we've got some updates to bring back to you as a result of the feedback that we received. The three items that we want to address that Reese went over are the quarterly update, authorization of the TFLA funding from Prime Meridian Bank, outside agency update, and then sidewalk update from the capital plan. We have just closed, as of yesterday, the June books and are updating you on the third quarter estimate. Since we brought an update in May, there's not been a lot of change. One positive change in that the water fund has moved back to a positive status. I think we mentioned that in June. We saw sales increase, so that was a positive move. We are still monitoring closely the general fund. In fact, just because yesterday was the close of June, we've realized that, to give you context, we were at a budget of $159 million. Expenditures were less than the budget, which was positive news, $155 million, $156 million, but revenues were down also, and so there was a gap, 0.06% gap. We're confident that we can balance that budget in the next 3 months, now looking at just about 2 months. But the positive news yesterday was we saw some adjustments in our fleet fund that impact the general fund as a result of some of the maintenance that had to be done coming out of Michael. We've seen some lessening in those charges for our fleet areas, and so that's a positive result. And so we are fully confident that we'll be able to balance the budget at year end. What it ultimately means is that for fiscal year 20, that our budget assumptions are solid, that we can expect to go into fiscal year 20 with a balanced budget and using much of the same assumptions that we used in developing the budget. One aspect of that fiscal year 20 budget that I wanted to speak to was at the June 5th workshop, you gave us direction to have the 28 requests for funding from outside agencies with a response by this July meeting. 26 of the 28 agencies did respond with a request for funding. There were 2 agencies, the Civil Citation Program and the Trauma Center, that did not request additional or recurring funding. They've fully implemented their program and or the agreement with them expired, and so additional funding wasn't necessary. Of the 26 entities that did request funding, it's a $68,000 difference in what we budgeted in fiscal year 19 and what we were proposing in fiscal year 20. As you directed, we've committed to match that gap with a few opportunities. The gas utility has agreed to sponsor the Downtown Improvement Authority, and as such, that defrays a little bit of the cost of what we were spending on outside agency funding. We're also looking at adjustments to the lobbying contract. I know we're using some of that for the Tempo program, but anything that is left after their use, we'll apply that for balancing the outside agency funding. And then we do expect that there would be some additional revenues from a recent parking transfer of a contract from Midtown back to the city. And so those additional revenues could be applied to offset this increased cost. One other note of these 26 of 28 agencies that requested funding, we did receive a request, and it was spoken to in the public comments, of $31,900 for the Orange Avenue Youth Project. That has not been reflected in the 2020 budget, and so we're requesting that you provide direction on that request, since it was an additional request that was not part of the original 28. The capital improvement plan that we've talked about as we went through the process in October, November, and December, and then brought back an update in May, is consistent with your commission priorities. Wanted to highlight public safety as one example. We've got funding for the active shooter response equipment, for the license plate reader equipment, taser replacement, and then also for the future public safety complex. The investment in technology for public safety is about $2.1 million. And then over the 5 years, we've got an $834 million investment across the 5-year capital plan. That's context for what we want to talk about as we approach our September meetings. Our capital improvement estimated appropriation is $155.6 million. As you know, we plan for a 5-year period. We want to look forward and be sure that we're understanding what funding we have, what needs we have, and then balancing the two. In September, at the first public hearing, we'll be asking for an appropriation for fiscal year 20, and that's demonstrated here for the general government portion, our public infrastructure and traffic, our fleet, our technology and infrastructure, and then other various general funded departments of about $50 million. And we're looking at about $105.6 million in investment in our utilities, electric, gas, water, sewer, aviation. This also includes, this $155 million includes our commitment to sidewalks. And that was made very clear that we've in the last 3 or 4 years, we've established a rhythm with our maintenance program and with our construction program. We've been able to do additional roadway paving with an additional commitment. We've moved from 23 lane miles to 60 lane miles and are doing that on average. Sidewalk maintenance, we've moved that from 2,000 to 2,500 trip hazard removals a year to nearly 10,000 a year. Similarly, we want to make a similar commitment, and you directed us to make that commitment for sidewalks. And what we're proposing is committing to 10 new sidewalks a year in the 5-year plan, starting in fiscal year 20. We've got those items listed: Weems Road Extension, Texas Street, which was mentioned earlier, Gadsden Street South. A lot of these sidewalks were on our original list. They are high pedestrian. They provide important access to parks and recreation. They provide access to schools and to transit. And so they've been accelerated in order to address them and begin construction in fiscal year 20. I've got a more detailed map than the smaller one that I'd like to reference. We are looking at some progress in sidewalks, in that we've completed in the last 5 years about $55 million in sidewalk construction across the community, noted with the yellow highlighting in the name of the segment. We are also have another $6.5 million under construction. Those are the items highlighted in red. And then we're proposing another $14.5 million for the 10 segments. And almost most importantly, as we went through this process of accelerating these sidewalks, identified some community choice opportunities. the Frenchtown and Springfield neighborhoods and the Bond community have all committed to infrastructure improvement plans. And so we want to make sure that in this next fiscal year, we're committed to working with them to identify 3 sidewalk options in each neighborhood, and then that construction progress at their direction. And that's in working with Blueprint and with the community redevelopment agencies to ensure that sidewalk construction is happening in those 2 neighborhoods. I think I went too far. We've, it's been an update, so it's a brief update, but we're ready for any reaction or comments. We are looking forward to September public hearings to bring the budget to a close and adopt for the October 1 fiscal year. We are meeting all state and property appraiser and tax collector commitments to report. Trim notices will go out August 24th. You committed to the 4.1 mills and adopted the 2 dates for our public hearing, September 11th and September 25th. And therefore, those will be publicly noticed, and each taxpayer will receive notice in the mail of their property taxes. And we're recommending that the City Commission accept the third quarter budget update. Most importantly, because fiscal year 19, we want to authorize and appropriate the money from Prime Meridian Bank for the Future Leaders Academy, and then accept the outside agency funding update and the capital sidewalk plan. I'm open to questions or comments.
Excellent. You want to ask questions now or take public? Do we have public comment? Okay, excellent. Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, just one question, Robert, on the Tram Road sidewalk, how do we determine, well, the first question would be, is that going to be the length of Tram Road from South Monroe to Capitol Circle Southeast? And how did we determine that Tram Road was a priority for sidewalks? Because I use that roadway very frequently, taking my daughter to school at Florida High, and I seldom see anybody use it other than traffic, not foot traffic, but.
There's an opportunity that we have here, and what I'll ask Steve Schaefer to specifically respond to that. But with the development of the Southeast Park, there was a great opportunity to add a segment there.
Okay.
And good afternoon. That's a good question. The Tram Road is actually a multi-use trail that's part of the Blueprints Greenways sales tax project. We're able to leverage some funding because we're able to construct this in conjunction with the Southeast Park. The trail actually comes up from Capitol Circle, along Tram Road to Four Oaks, and then through the park. And so this is a component of something that had already been under.
Okay, so it will be the eastern part of Tram Road from
correct.
Capitol Circle East rather than
Yes.
Capitol Circle West. Okay, all right. That makes sense.
Great question.
Questions? Commissioner Williams-Cox.
I understand that we had 2 agencies who determined they no longer needed funding. I think I read it here somewhere, but what was that total?
About $80,000. The civil citation program was a $30,000 commitment, and then the trauma center was a $50,000 commitment that expired June of this year.
Okay. With that, if we want to call that a savings compared to where we were at the last budget meeting, I would want to move that we bring in the additional ask, because as I understand, it was submitted timely and completely, that we bring in that additional ask of $31,900, which is just a small portion of the $80,000 that we no longer are asked for.
I would second that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Commissioner Murray?
Are we carrying a motion first? Or?
I'm going to come back to Commissioner Williams-Cox for a final motion to include that. Wait, we can take care of that right now if you want.
we got a
Motion
second?
on the table. Any further comment?
My further comment was to say that since it was submitted prior to now, that there is absolutely no reason not to consider it as to be included. And then I'll get back later to my comments about the whole process. But
Yes.
that's for this motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other comment? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay. Staff directed?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Okay. Commissioner Williams-Cox, you still have the floor? Or are you wrapped up?
I'm done.
Okay. Commissioner Bryant?
Yes.
Commissioner Bryant, would you pull your microphone down so that those listening otherwise can hear
Sure.
it? Thank you.
Yes, sir. On the balancing of the budget for the end of this year, I know we've spoken several times about our income and the projection that it should balance at the end of the fiscal year, our fiscal year. So are we very confident that will happen?
Yes,
Okay.
we are.
I won't ask my question then. All right.
I like that confidence.
I like that expression on his face with that confidence.
The next question that I had regards the lobbying firm. As I read the notes, are we saying that we are taking excess funds by delaying our selection of a firm as it is time now that we actually do an RFP? Or did I read that correctly, or?
I'll address that, Commissioner.
Mr. Manager?
So we contract for lobbying services at the state level and the federal level. The state contract expires this year, and so it's up for renewal, or we'd have to go through another competitive selection process. We spend about $90,000 a year on those services. We wish to take the tact of trying to merge those two efforts together, state and federal. We think we can get more bang for the buck, if you will. So if we forego a year of service, we conduct that lobbying in-house, which I believe we can do well, and align those together next year, federal and state, which the federal contract will be expiring at that time. It's a year delayed. We can realize the savings. Basically, it's an expense reduction, and then hopefully gain more synergy in the service if we choose to continue to contract for lobbying services.
So do we have an office or a group of people dedicated to do lobbying?
We started that this past year, which gives me some comfort. As you know, Christian Doolin, he's our manager of strategic innovation. We also tasked him with lobbying and lobbying updates. So we were able to kind of get our feet underneath us, and we would charge his office with those efforts. We would, of course, maintain if necessary, on a particular issue or topic, we would have the ability to contract on an issue-specific basis. So if something came up during the legislative session, clearly the lobbying happens during that very concentrated legislative session, the lead up to it, and during session. If we needed to contract with somebody, we have that flexibility. We would engage with you to do that, but based on our experience last year, I don't think that will be necessary, and I believe we can manage through this year and save the dollars.
Commissioner Bryant, if you remember, when we first were seated at the beginning of the new year, I moved the lobbying operations out of the mayor's office into the city manager's office. We all agreed that it would be more efficient and effective that way. The purpose for doing that was to build a team that could solely focus in-house on our lobbying efforts because of our unique position being across the street. We were finishing up the end of a lobbying contract that we all honored that was previously approved by the previous commission. So the question is, do you go out to RFP to hire a new state lobbyist, or because we're in this new model, should we give it a shot because we have built an in-house team? I am willing to follow the lead of the city manager on this issue and build an in-house team, knowing that in the final days of the session, if we need to contract on a specific appropriation issue, we have the resources to do so. This is not an uncommon practice as well for those municipalities that decide not to have a full contract lobbyist on staff. I think that city management is trying to think outside the box and bring us different issues, which I appreciate. So Commissioner Bryant still has the floor, and then we'll come down.
One final comment.
down the line.
So the funds the 90,000 that we will now divert to Tempo will become a recurring fund?
The dollars aren't
source?
necessarily directed, but we would acknowledge that would be an expense savings in the general fund. Tempo would be funded from the general fund, so essentially I'm using that to balance that bigger pot of dollars, which is approximately $160 million. So it would be a decrement to the expenses. We would acknowledge that because we certainly were counting on some money to come from the state in the form of grant funding. The proposed budget, we assumed we would get that grant money. It did not come through, and so for this year, certainly would help offset that loss of expected revenues. It's not programmed directly to Tempo. I am committed to Tempo with your direction and full support. It would not be tied to a funding source. So the future success of Tempo would not be tied to a funding source that may or may not be recurring. It would become a core function of what we do and funded generally throughout the revenues of the general fund.
Okay, I got the Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioner Matlow, and then back to Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I too share Commissioner Bryant's concern about our not having contractual lobbying services. I served in the legislature for 8 years. I know what that process is all about. It's based on relationships. It's not something that you can do on a part-time basis and show up during the appropriation. You show up during the appropriation, there's nothing in the budget for you. It's a year-round process based on relationships, your understanding of the process, your understanding of who's in office at the time, like I said, building those relationships on a year-round basis. And I can tell you, like I said, I've not been here a very long time myself, but I have seen in the past that through our contractual lobbying services that we have been able to get appropriations through the legislature that we would not have gotten if we were sending an inexperienced team on a part-time basis to the legislature. I really can't stress it enough that it is those municipalities and counties that either have a full-time lobbyist or have a contracted lobbyist that are the ones that are most successful in getting revenues from the state. I mean, I just can't tell you, we can't short shrift that if we expect to be successful in that process across the street. I think, you know, we were successful even under our previous governor with the lobbyists that we contracted with, and I'm not proposing anyone. If we go out for bid, we go out for bid, if that's what we choose to do. We were successful with the lobbyists that we had, even with our previous governor. I think with the new governor, we could do even better because I think he would be more in a posture of working with us as the capital city. So let's not short shrift this and think that, oh, we'll have, because except by the time you get to the appropriation process, there is nothing for you. We have to have somebody there on a full-time basis, not, you know, I'll do this when I have a few minutes to do it on top of my other responsibilities at City Hall. So I just want us to consider that. I've been there. I was there for 8 years, and I know it's not something that you can do on a part-time basis or, you know, when you think you've got an issue that's important to you. That's a process where you build relationships over the years, and as issues come up. And when we develop our legislative priorities, you know, who's going to carry that for us during the year? You know, you just can't contract with somebody at the last minute and say, you know, we need you to carry this issue for us. It doesn't work that way in the legislature, guys. So I put that out there for us to consider.
Mr. Manager.
Commissioner, I appreciate your comments, and of course, I agree with you that there is a relation. We were dealing largely in appropriations. Those would be that'd be the nature of the lobbying. And as we were looking at it, we recognized, and I mentioned this earlier, I think we could find a great deal of synergy with our federal efforts too. In fact, I think we do the majority of our lobbying at the state level, not the federal level. The federal level tends to be more informative. And so we were looking for ways to save money, bridge the gap, and synchronize those efforts. I think we can. I feel pretty confident that we can do it. I know the dollars at the state level are tight, so we'll have to be very precise in what we ask for. We know all of the local dollars that were included in the proposed budget from the legislature were vetoed this year because the dollars are tight. And so I feel pretty confident we can identify those very targeted requests of the legislature, work with our legislative delegation as our team, and then posture ourselves to get the maximum effort of lobbying. I would not ask you today to abandon hiring lobbyists. I'm not asking that, but I do believe there's a great opportunity to synchronize it with our federal efforts that will seek that contract next year.
And before I move down the line, I'll weigh in too, because while I do agree with you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I also have extensive experience in municipal lobbying on both the state and the federal level. And I guess part of my frustration is 2 of the past 3 years where we have executed contracts for $90,000, 2 of the past 3 years, we have not been successful with any appropriations. And so I do think it is encouraging to think outside the box on new approaches in trying to come up with the most effective strategy. And I don't think anybody, if that's the direction that we go, is talking about just a part-time position. I think that part of the strategy of moving it under city manager's office is to actually have a director of legislative affairs. It would be a city employee that would work directly with the legislative delegation and with us, but because of the proximity to the Capitol, it is something for us to consider. But yeah, I mean, we're not making the decision today whether to completely get rid of the program, but I do appreciate staff thinking creatively. You still have the floor unless you're done with questions.
No, I did have one other thing. And I wanted to bring this up because we've talked about it before, and I thought that Commissioner Bryant was going to raise it when she talked about process. This whole process of outside agency funding. I think we need to direct the city manager and staff to come back to us with a process for addressing this agency funding, because I really can see this getting out of control if we don't get some handle on it, like we had to do with the CHSP process. I think that for those agencies that we are funding outside of the process, now that CHSP process is opening up for its next 2-year cycle, that we steer them towards CHSP and give them whatever support they might need to be successful in that process. And then we have some process for those agencies that may not be eligible for CHSP, but still need some support from us, that we have a process. And that people know early on what that process is, because I really can see this getting out of control if we don't have that in place. That was one of the reasons why, this question came up initially, because each year we had more and more agencies coming to us outside of the CHP process. We heard one ask even this morning. So I would just caution us in that regard and ask the commission to direct the city manager and his staff to come back to us for a process that we can consider for funding those agencies that do not maybe meet the criteria for CHSP, but might still need some support in the 2021 fiscal year budget.
Good comment. Thank you. Commissioner Matlow.
Thank you. I want to go back to the lobbying. With all due respect, I think we were waiting to speak on that issue before it became kind of back and forth with Commissioner Richardson. I do think going into a session, if we don't have a plan in place, we're leaving money on the table. I think there is something to gain of having an effective lobbying effort in place. Right now, I don't know if we're there yet or have any type of strategy. A compromise that I would recommend is I expressed my dissatisfaction with what we received in the previous year, and considering the city manager's comments of lining up with the federal contract, there was talk of cutting the budget for it. So I would recommend we put out an RFP for a $45,000 6-month contract, which would get us through session. we'd be able to gauge the merits of how successful they were if we liked working with them as a new commission. And then that contract could be renewed, or it could go out again if we were unhappy at that point. So that way, it doesn't necessarily cut what we're willing to spend, but it gets us through a session and see if there's a return that we're happy with. And I think that would be a good compromise, and I'd make that a motion.
I would second that for discussion.
Okay, there's a motion on the table with its proper second. Any other comment?
I would add on to that, I agree that we don't need to go into this legislative session, which workshops begin in September,
Yes.
that we do not need to go out into that bold new world without some help, protection, some coverage. And I know of agencies who have gone without lobbying, and they got a real good haircut this past session. Real good, from $2 million to $750,000.
Yeah.
So that's what happens when you go with, folks you don't know, don't have a relationship with. I agree that we don't need to wait until the appropriation time to do that, because the appropriation budget and deals and everything have already been cut. They're beginning to be cut now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and keep in mind, this is a political town. This commission, all of us are of the same party. Across the street, the majority of them are of different party. So you want to think about that too, as we try to secure funding to do the things that we do. I am not going against Tempo. I'll give up Matt Lowe's right arm for Tempo. But we've got to find another way to do this, and this is one where we cannot divide the baby, because we'll lose the baby if we do that. So I agree with the compromise to come up with a half year, or if that's an issue, go out with RFP for whatever we can afford, and let's see who bites.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any further comment? All right, sounds good. So the motion on the table is to go out to RFP for a lobbying contract for $45,000. Well, you will bring the RFP, back to us in September for final approval, is that it? Or the motion on the table is just to go directly out to RFP? Because you have to define the terms of the contract and the timing. Help me out here.
Yeah,
Hold on, clarify the motion real quick, I'm sorry.
I guess my anticipation would, it would go out, and then we would accept it when we come back, and then it would.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That'd be right. We'd issue the RFP, we'd get the proposals, we'd bring back a recommendation for the vendor, whoever is the highest ranked vendor, ideally in September.
And that'll be right around the start of committee meetings.
Yeah.
The session is early.
Obviously, I would think that the likely proposers would be those that are engaged in the industry. And we'd put in the RFP a $45,000 budget.
For a 6-month term.
I think we would put that in, is that we understand that might be a less than annual term. I'll have to work with our procurement folks. I would like to preserve the ability to synchronize with the federal agreement next year, so I would want to make that clear to the proposers. That's what we're attempting to do. We'll figure out how to characterize that.
Okay, any further comment on the motion on the table regarding lobbying services? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Aye. Passes 4-1 with the mayor dissenting. You have the floor still.
Yeah, okay, it's still, okay.
Yeah. Commissioner Matlow.
All right, well, now that I got one arm left, I want to go back to Tempo. And I agree. I mean, the intention here isn't, to pit one program against another. And I just we were talking 150 from what we kind of lost from the governor's veto. And I just wanted to see what our plan was moving forward. Are we cutting the program? Are we keeping it whole from where we were trying to go? And then secondly, in the capital improvement plan, there's a $50,000 for facilities. And I know we've talked about a permanent kind of Tempo facility in the future, and it didn't see any funding in subsequent years. And I'm just kind of looking for a plan of where that's headed.
Yeah,
Robert?
The $50,000 was a placeholder to make sure that we recognize that we need a facility for Tempo. not knowing what that will be, where it will be, what it undertakes. We identified that as a renovation and either rental type placeholder.
Okay.
And then it's our intention that when we know what that amount is, we'll amend the budget and update that and commit to that facility.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I want to go back to sidewalks. And, my concern here is when we kind of start to commingle our city budget with our CRA budget. The CRA meets tomorrow and it'll approve some of the expenses related to the sidewalks. And I'm 100% in favor of funding those sidewalks in Bond and funding those sidewalks in Frenchtown. But I want to make sure the city of Tallahassee is doing its part in its commitment, because I don't want to see us just transfer the responsibility of sidewalks to the CRA when some of those sidewalks should be funded by the city of Tallahassee on the sidewalk improvement program. Our prioritization chart, we had some upcoming sidewalks that were in the Frenchtown neighborhood, presumably that will be funded with city of Tallahassee dollars. So I'd like to see those, the synergy of both. So as we start to develop these plans in future years, we're making sure we're not just transferring the responsibility of sidewalk buildings all to the CRA. We're doing our part as the city also.
Good point. Commissioner Williams-Cox?
Well, we've discussed, one of the items I had concern about was the lobbying piece. But the other part is Commissioner Richardson is correct about having a process for the outside agencies. And we talked about this at the last meeting. And I believe what we determined, and I didn't go through the minutes exactly, but we determined that for this year, we would continue this process, but going forward, a process would be defined that we could follow. And I think staff was directed to develop that. But for this time, this is what we're doing, and this is last time that we will be doing it this way. But then also in speaking with some of these agencies, the CHSP process, being a 2-year process, caused some concern because they couldn't get into the process for 2 years. So for small agencies or for agencies who would like to try that process, they have to wait 2 years to get back in. So if we're gonna, not if, but when we look at a process for funding outside of CHSP, if we decide to continue to do that, we need to have a way for them to get in. It's like double dutch. You gotta get a way to get in, and right now there's no way to get in. So this is what they're having to resort to. So whatever the process is, we're gonna have Jim see down there. I was never real good at double dutch, so I could never get in. So I understand. We're trying to get people in. So.
But unless they're new agencies, they have the opportunity.
Ms. Barber.
Unless they're new agencies, they have the opportunity.
Okay.
Like now, we're announcing that we'll start this process in
Right.
January. So if there are existing agencies, and the majority of these agencies or these ideas are coming from existing people who've been here, it is a very engaged process. It does take a lot, and small agencies sometimes are challenged by that.
Right.
But in most cases, that's the deterrent, more so than not having access.
And now that we're going to have a workshop in October on the CHSP process, knowing is also an issue because many do not know the process. Those who've been here for years and years, like you say, they know, but new agencies or new small groups who are really, and I'll keep saying this, who are boots on the ground, they've been doing this not knowing that there was available funding. They've been doing this anyway. So now they've learned that there's available funding, so knowing what that process is. But I go back to fund outside agencies going forward, we have already discussed having a process to do that, and CHSP is an alternative, but for those who may not qualify, we still need a process for how they can get in to get funding as well.
Commissioner Williams-Cox, would you like to entertain a motion to direct staff to bring back options at that workshop that we're going to have in October, November regarding CHSP process? Is that what I understand?
Well, actually, we have a CHSP process.
Right,
We're
but
talking about how to deal with those who don't qualify for CHSP. So yes, that's my motion.
Okay. I'll second the motion. Is there any further discussion?
What is the motion?
I'm sorry.
What is the motion?
The motion is,
Commissioner Williams-Cox?
the motion is that we're asking staff to come back to us with the process at the CHSP workshop for agencies that do not qualify for CHSP funding
That they can get from the city.
that they can get from the city.
Friendly amendment, not only a process, but criteria.
Yes,
Right.
that's part of the
Bring,
process.
to have
The
staff
whole
bring back
part.
options,
Okay.
correct.
Okay,
Yes.
Commissioner Matlow.
amendment accepted.
Just for the clarification I'm looking for is we're trying to take the entire outside agencies funding category and find its placement. So if there's things in there that aren't social services at all, I know previously we worked at trying to put those in departmental budgets and something like that, but is that the end goal, to take everything out of this category and find out where it fits, whether that's a new?
Well, that wasn't my intent, but I will say that I do know that there are a lot of things that are here outside of, and I've talked to others that are outside of the human services. And so my question is, where is it defined that those are the only kinds of entities that can be funded, those dealing with human services? What about, we got Eni out there who's dealing with all nonprofits, but we've been providing funding for United Partners who deals with human services. So where is it that we split apart the type somewhere?
That's the same thing, I guess, I'm getting at, is a process for everybody who's getting
Everybody.
funding, what's the process should be that they should get
Everybody.
into? Okay.
Right.
Got it.
And Commissioner Matlow, you're on the record, I'm on the record, and I love the idea. I don't think that the city of Tallahassee should direct fund agencies. I think that the rules of CHSP should be amended so that everybody goes to that process and we don't have the direct funding requests that come to us. Everybody goes to the CHSP process.
Or a defined process, which is
Well,
the motion.
There are some that, like, for instance, St. Francis is one. They don't deal with people, they deal with animals. And so that's why they came directly to the city for assistance, because without them, that would be a service that the city would have. So that's why St. Francis is funded.
And I'm going to
in that
support the
respect.
motion on the table. I'm going to support this budget recommendation with the outside agencies, but moving forward, I am looking for change.
Yes. Agreed.
Right. Any other comment?
Call the question.
All right, well, first of all, we got the motion on the table. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, passes unanimously 5-0. Commissioner Matlow, any other general questions on the, would anybody like to make a motion for staff recommendation on the overall budget?
I'd move staff recommendation. Mr.
Mayor Pro Tem has moved staff recommendation on the workshop item. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Bryant. Robert, once again, thank you very much.
Always
And thank you for
excellent.
bringing us through. This is our first budget process. We have now brought it in for a landing. When we come back, I'm going to, after the motion, ask you to explain the process from when we come back from the recess on. All those in favor of the motion on the table signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, passes unanimously 5-0. Robert, will you just bring us in for a landing and tell us the rest of the budget process from now until September 30th?
Sure. I did mention that advertisements, trim notices will go out August 24th based on the motion made last month, June. September 11th, we'll open up a public hearing. There's a prescriptive set of 10 or 11 steps that we have to go through in order to open the public hearing, accept comments, notice specific language we have to read into the record. The city attorney is excellent at walking us through that process. We'll have a script for that. At that point, we'll not only adopt the city budget, but also the millage rate formally. We'll adopt the Downtown Improvement Authority millage rate and budget at that time. And then September 25th will be the final adoption, where we go through much the same process. And we can share that script with you so that you're familiar with that. And it's familiar.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Is there any other business coming before the city at this workshop?
No, sir.
Seeing none, we stand adjourned till the 4 o'clock regularly scheduled meeting.
Good job.